You know, we're always taught to avoid failure, like it's the plague. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? What if mistakes aren't just on the path to success? What if they are the path? Okay, let's get into this whole paradox.
So picture this, it's World War II. The US military has a huge problem. They're losing way too many bombers, so they come up with a plan. They're going to look at all the planes that actually make it back from missions, map out every single bullet hole, and then add extra armor to the spots that get hit the most. Sounds totally logical, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense.
But then, this statistician, a guy named Abraham Wald, he steps in and basically tells them to stop. He says they should do the complete opposite, reinforce the parts of the plane with no bullet holes. Now, why on earth would he say that? Well, it's because the military was falling for a massive critical error in their thinking.
And that error, it actually has a name, and once you see it, you start to see it everywhere, from a World War II airfield all the way to a modern boardroom. It's this dangerous flaw in how we see success, and it's called the survivorship illusion.
See, what Wald figured out was that they were only looking at the survivors. The bullet holes they were seeing, those were just the places a plane could get shot and still limp back home. The planes that got hit in those other undamaged spots, critical places like the engine or the cockpit, they weren't on the airfield. They never made it back. And that's where the most important data was hiding, in those silent failures.
And this is such a perfect example of how this bias messes with our view of reality, right? We hear all about the college dropout who becomes a billionaire, but we never hear about the thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, who dropped out and ended up struggling. We're always focused on the survivors, and it gives us this completely warped, unrealistic idea of what success looks like. So, if looking at the outside world is so flawed, what happens when we turn the lens on ourselves?
Turns out our own internal reaction to mistakes is just as important, and it all comes down to our mindset.
Okay, so there's this researcher, Carol Dweck, who came up with this brilliant idea of two core mindsets. First, you've got the fixed mindset. These are people who believe their talents and abilities are just fixed. That's it. So for them, failing is like getting a final, terrible grade on who they are. Naturally, they start to avoid challenges. But then you have the growth mindset. These folks believe skills can be built, through effort. And for them, failure isn't a verdict at all. It's just useful feedback. It's a clue for how to get better.
And get this, this isn't just some feel-good psychology. It's actual biology. Your brain has this amazing superpower called neuroplasticity. It means your brain can literally rewire itself, forming new connections based on what you do and what you believe. So a growth mindset isn't just a positive attitude. It's like sending an instruction manual to your brain that says, hey, get ready to learn and change.
In fact, scientists can actually see this happening. When someone with a growth mindset messes up, their brain lights up with this stronger electrical signal. They call it error positivity. It means their brain is literally leaning in, paying closer attention to the mistake, trying to figure out what went wrong so it can learn. Their brain is physically primed for growth.
So, okay, our mindset gets our brain ready to learn from our mistakes. But how many mistakes are we talking about here? This is where things get really interesting when we look at the cold, hard math of success.
There's this core idea in statistics called the law of large numbers. Basically, it says that in the short term, everything is kind of random and chaotic. You flip a coin 10 times, you might get heads 7 times. But if you flip it 1,000 times, you're going to get really close to a 50-50 split. It means that persistence isn't just a virtue, it's a mathematical strategy. It's how you beat bad luck.
I mean, just look at this. A few tries and the results are all over the place, totally unpredictable. But as you add more and more attempts, a clear pattern starts to show up. All that short-term chaos smooths out into long-term predictability. A lot of the time, success is really just about staying in the game long enough for the math to finally work out for you. And history is just filled with examples of this. Take James Dyson. He didn't get his vacuum right on the first try, or the 100th, or even the 1,000th. He created 5,126 prototypes that failed before he finally nailed the one that worked.
Or Michael Jordan, maybe the greatest basketball player of all time. He missed more than 9,000 shots in his career. 9,000! But he famously said, "I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." He saw every miss as a step towards winning.
And what about Thomas Edison? When he was inventing the light bulb, he didn't have 1,000 failures. He said he found 1,000 steps, 1,000 ways that wouldn't work. See the pattern here? All of these innovators, they weren't just persistent. They intuitively understood the math.
Okay, so this doesn't mean we should just go out and fail for the sake of failing. That's not the point. The number of tries is super important, yeah, but it has to be paired with a smart strategy. It's all about learning how to fail smart.
Because, let's be honest, not all failures are the same. A Harvard professor named Amy Edmondson makes this really clear. A company culture that just celebrates any and all failure is probably just as messed up as one that punishes every mistake. You gotta be able to tell the difference. And she gives us this amazing framework to do just that. First, you have basic failures. These are preventable screw-ups, like forgetting a step in a process. You want to avoid those. Then there are complex failures, kind of like a perfect storm, where a bunch of little things go wrong at once. You need to analyze those. But then you have intelligent failures, and these are the ones you want. These are the good ones. They're thoughtful experiments into the unknown, and they are, quite literally, the price you pay for innovation.
So how do you know if a failure is intelligent? Well, there's a 4-point checklist. 1. It has to be in new territory. 2. It's got to be chasing a real opportunity, not just a random idea. 3. You've done your research. It's not a blind guess. And 4, and this one is so important, the experiment is as small as it can possibly be to still give you the knowledge you need. You're trying to learn the most by risking the least.
And if you've ever heard the phrase, fail fast, this is exactly what they're talking about. It's the whole idea behind creating a minimum viable product, or an MVP. You build the smallest, simplest version of your idea. You get it out into the real world, and you see what happens. You gather real data and learn from your small, intelligent failures before you go all in and bet the farm. It's this whole philosophy put into practice.
So, when you put it all together, when you understand our biases, you work on a growth mindset, you respect the math, and you learn to fail intelligently, you start to see failure in a whole new light.
You know, J.K. Rowling, who, by the way, was rejected by 12 different publishers, she said it best. It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Think about that. The biggest failure isn't messing up. It's being so afraid to mess up that you never even try. So that leaves a question for all of us, right? A challenge, really. Not to go out and have some massive, spectacular failure, but to plan a small, thoughtful one. A little strategic experiment that's designed to teach you something new. So, what intelligent failure can you afford to make this week?